Hello again. This is Linda Roth, the president of ACG 101 Corridor Chapter and the founder of LJR Consulting Services, an executive IT consulting firm. You are listening to the ACG 101 Corridor Corporate Governance Internet Radio program. ACG, Association for Corporate Growth, is the premier business organization for middle market companies. The 14,000 plus members include CEOs, CFOs, and other executives of mid-market companies, private equity firms, investment bankers, and the professional services corporations that support those companies. ACG 101 Corridor is one of the fastest growing chapters in the nation and works with companies in the West San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, Ventura County, and Santa Barbara. With me today is Stephen Romero. He is the owner of Romero Consulting and the IT governance evangelist. So Steve, welcome and tell us how you became the IT governance evangelist.
Oh, well, hello, Linda. Thanks for the welcome, and it's a pleasure talking to you today. So let's see. Trying to make this brief because, frankly, the title of IT governance evangelist was actually 30 years in the making. I started in IT, again, close to 30 years ago, and before I knew it, very early in my IT career, I had an affinity for process, which made me a bit of an anachronism in my IT environment, because most of my IT compatriots, although they were great at inflicting process on others, we didn't have much of a discipline of actually doing process ourselves. So I spent the early part of my IT career installing a lot of discipline and process, and unbeknownst to me, about 20 years ago, it actually was governance that I was implementing, but long before we popularized the term in the late 1990s. I formally took on the title of IT governance when I accepted a position in my previous company. It's with CA Technologies, who had just acquired a product called Clarity from a company called Niku, and it was one of the premier product and portfolio management tools in the world, and they had the problem of actually establishing a reputation for CA in the IT governance space, where product and portfolio management is clearly associated. So they felt it would be good if they had someone that could help connect them with the industry, and without going into a lot more detail on how many planets need to be aligned for us to actually meet one another and fall into each other's laps, so to speak, they basically brought me in as a product-agnostic evangelizer of the discipline of IT governance. And in the course of about 10 interviews with them, they asked me, okay, what is your title going to be? And it just seemed a natural thing to call myself, and it stuck. And it's how most people identify me today.
Yep, well, that's how you and I met when I was working on a blog post and had done some research and came across you as the IT governance evangelist. So it's a great story, and I'm certainly glad you've been able to join us. Stephen is going to be one of our panelists at the ACG Corporate Governance Conference, and he's going to be on the panel about IT governance and at the board level. So as part of that, Steve, you have recently written your new book, Eliminating Us and Them, Making IT and Business One. And you had a really good story about how that came to be.
Right. So, again, a long time in the making. It's a book that really takes the last 20 years of experience that I have in trying to help IT organizations realize the most, or helping enterprise, realize the most from their investment in information technology. And the three areas that I found over time and how I wish I had actually known about the relationship between these three things, because I actually encountered them one discipline at a time. So I mentioned process before, and how critical process is to success, and how I helped many organizations implement some of their very first IT processes. That evolved into governance. So beyond just the process, the mechanics of doing things, I actually worked in the area of decision making and how to make sure that the enterprise makes the most reasoned and rational decisions. So the book is actually a culmination of a number of years of working in IT, just as the IT governance evangelist title that I have is. The three main aspects of the book are governance, process, and organizational behavior. And you'll find many books on each of those subjects, but those three subjects are something that I have found, and unfortunately I had the the lack of the benefit of looking at them all at the same time. It was actually at different points in my career that I became exposed to the power and promise of good process and good process management, where I came to the epiphany that IT governance was the key to enterprises realizing the most value from their investment in technology by making the right decisions within the organization. And then last but not least, organizational behavior. To get anything to work, especially when it comes to things that are under a formal governance and process construct, you have to have the right culture. You have to have the right behaviors in the organization. And I can actually take you back into 3 different parts of my career with 3 different companies where I evolved experience in each of those, and it was only in the last 5 or 6 years that those 3 things coalesce into the concepts that I capture in my book. That you can find, again, books on every one of those subjects that are very good, and most organizations address each one of them independently, but you'll find very few organizations that understand the complete interdependency between the 3. And my book tries to underscore and emphasize how critical it is that if you're addressing governance, that you need to address process at the same time. And when you're addressing process, you have to address culture. And it tries to convey the importance of those 3 things coalescing into a single effort to achieve the outcomes that organizations try to achieve.
Well, all 3 of those are very important. As you know, you and I agree on a lot of this stuff, and I like your comment about decision making, because in clients all the time, I'm always concerned about the decisions they're making, and I'm sure you've come across this, they tend to make decisions based on what's the flashiest thing that they can do, or instead of really looking at what requirements are, what's the thing I used at the last company I was at, or what's the hottest new technology I can buy, or things like that, rather than really putting together, when you and I came together, I was doing some research on IT strategy, really putting together a strategy for the technology that's going to be required to build out the company strategy.
Right, that's absolutely true. And what's interesting, I mean, you recognize how decisions are made, and I'm always amazed when I'm approached by people, especially after they've heard my thoughts on IT governance, or they've read my book, or they've been to one of my workshops, or heard one of my presentations, and they come up to me and say, "How do I get my organization to establish governance, or to establish IT governance? Because we don't have any governance today." But you bring up a great point. At the heart of governance, and really the simplest definition of governance, is the decisions or the process and relationships that lead to reasoned decision-making. Governance is all about decisions. What decisions do we need to govern? Who's accountable for making those decisions? And how will those decisions be made? And so it's all about decision-making. So those people that approach me to ask, how do I get governance in my organization, they don't realize that they have governance already. If anybody is making decisions, you have governance. The question is what is governing those decisions? And you brought up a number of things that govern those decisions. But when in the absence of formal governance, what's governing the decisions are people, the relationships. And right. And again, as you noted, there are any number of things that motivate the decisions of individuals. Now the question becomes, are the outcomes of those decisions what are best for the enterprise? And when they're not necessarily the best for the enterprise, let's help those people make better decisions, and that's where you'll start seeing the manifestation of the formal governance mechanisms like policies, standards, and processes that enable those people to make the decisions that are in the best interest of the organization.
Well, agreed. And of course, people hate to do that. So the title of one of the chapters in your book is Falling in Love with IT Governance. Since people hate, and most of them just turn off to the word governance, period. How do you get them to fall in love with IT governance?
Right, and that's not lost on me at all. And I mentioned the other discipline in which I have a passion for, and that's process. And
that's even a worse word, right?
Right, it's probably the one of the words. I don't know. You'll find some people have a higher disdain for both, but it's usually a tie. And you're right. When people hear the word process, or when people hear the word governance, you can just see the change that takes place in their disposition and their response to it. And
right, and their glazed over eyes.
If you're lucky, I would welcome the glazed over as opposed to some of the anger or frustration that immediately wells up in those folks. And unfortunately, it's something that governance and process, they've I wouldn't say they've earned, but it's been inflicted on those disciplines over time, and it has much more to do with the way process and governance are implemented. Governance and process are thought of as being controlling, as limiting, as debilitating, as complex and bureaucratic. And when I hear people accuse governance and process of being those things, and I listen to their complaints, I can just about guarantee that they're true. And it's unfortunate. What's unfortunate is more enterprises than not look at them as ways of controlling, as ways of overseeing, as ways of limiting, as opposed to, if you look at governance and process the way I do, it's liberating, it's enabling. Governance and process is intended to make people successful. It's looking at the challenges that they're enduring day in and day out, and it's finding ways of helping them overcome those challenges. The only reason I would ever want to govern somebody is if they're having difficulty in the environment in which they're working to achieve the outcomes that they want. And there's any number of reasons. I mean, you brought up a big one, the lack of strategic planning. You know, it's very frustrating for an organization to try to achieve something if we don't know what we're trying to achieve. So one of the major governing processes is integrated strategic planning, integrated with business and IT when we're talking about a technology.
Right, yeah, that's what you and I had talked about originally.
So let's give that to people and give them those plans and give them the information that they need such that they can start, doing things at a tactical and operational level that will make it possible for them to do their work. We need to change the perception of governance out there, and that's what I've been evangelizing for 20 years informally and the last 6-7 years formally. I'm trying to change people's minds about organizations and people's minds about how they view governance and how they view process, and turn them on their ears, so to speak, and really look at them as something that enable people as opposed to controlling people. Well,
I certainly did like your words, liberating and enabling, because as you were talking, that was the word that was coming to my mind, was you make it liberating. And of course, back on strategy, a very, very, very long time ago, a famous person said, without a vision, the people perish. King Solomon. And so, it's still true today. So without a vision of where the business is going and without a vision of what you need IT to do to make sure the business gets where it wants to go, that then you end up with bad decisions or potentially bad decisions.
Absolutely. And when I think, and when I tell the story of, how did you fall in love with IT governance? I mean, they gave it to you at a high level, but there was something actually more concrete, and I think it's very analogous to what you said that talked about the vision. It's IT governance brings purpose to everything that someone does, everything that everybody does in the organization in regards to information technology, and it has to do with the principles of IT governance that I first discovered on the IT Governance Institute. And although there's plenty of definitions on IT governance out there, fortunately, almost all of them will make reference to the 5 principles of IT governance, again, that you'll find on the IT Governance Institute site, which is an offshoot of ISACA, the Information Systems Audit Control Association. And the principles are this. We want to make decisions to achieve one of 5 outcomes. We want to make decisions about technology, and that takes that technology and makes it a good fit for the organization. It's aligned with the business. It supports the business. It's what the business needs. We want to make a decision that delivers value to the business. So they're giving us some money, and we're going to make sure that we make decisions that return good value for that investment, for the money they're spending. We want to make decisions, and it manages risk. We're going to make sure that we don't put the company out of business by making poor decisions. We want to make decisions that make the best out of our resources, all of our resources, from our people to the equipment and the mechanics and the facilities that we have that make up our organizations. And last but not least, we want to make decisions that make the best out of the work, that get our processes to perform at their highest levels, performance. So those 5 things, aligning with the business, delivering value, managing risk, resources, and performance, those are the outcomes that we're seeking. And so everything you do in regards to governance, you want to ask one of those, which of those am I fulfilling? And if you're not fulfilling one or more of them, I just tell folks to stop doing that. They're wasting time. And I guess those 5, when I saw those 5 principles, it brought purpose. It brings purpose to every single thing that every single person in the organization does. And that's where I was convinced that it was the right approach and the right mindset. Now it's just a matter of ensuring that the way it manifests itself achieves that, actually helps people to succeed, which is the ultimate test.
Well, I'm sure that's the overarching theme of your book of eliminating us and them and making IT and business one. Because of those 5 things, really, IT can't decide in a vacuum what's best fit for the business, how to deliver value, how to manage risk, and all of those things. They need the business to work with them.
Very much so, and it's interesting now that in many cases, people talk about IT making decisions in a vacuum, and in many ways today it's portrayed as the vacuum is something that IT has created, like they've put themselves in this bubble, or they've put themselves in a position where they have complete authority over these decisions. And, I already mentioned how long I've been in IT. It's been a long time. And at the beginning of my career, that bubble only existed because the business didn't have an understanding of technology. And the unfortunate thing is we allowed that to provide the foundation that we're still enduring today, is that the business was actually disconnected from those decisions. They let the technologists make the decisions. They let us make the decisions. And that delegation of decision devolved into abdication of the decision. And now, that we can go into all the reasons why some of those decisions are inadequate. But we've got to find some way of bringing the business back, of getting the business back involved with those decisions. And again, unfortunately, many of the things that we've done is build up walls, and you can find fault on both sides of the fence. So the key now is going back to the beginning where the business and IT, they weren't separate. They weren't divided from one another. They were working together, and find some way of making that happen again today. And I'm convinced that its governance and process, when it's done properly, will actually achieve that.
Well, I would agree. And interestingly enough, I run into clients where, unfortunately, businesses understand IT better now than they did, like you said, 30 years ago, because I've been in the business as long as you have. And but the part that they understand is the flashy part. I had a client one time that has a million other problems in his business, but the thing that he was focused on was getting email on his iPad. And I'm sitting there looking at the risk and the chaos around him thinking, this is the least of your worries, pal.
Exactly. And it's a matter of, again, getting people to understand the value in some of the things that IT brings, like that assurance and that security and that risk management. But instead of standing behind standards and rules and regulations, it's always incumbent upon IT, with whatever policy or standard or process that they're inflicting on the business, to describe that in terms of business value. And frankly, and I've worked in IT my entire professional career. We've gotten somewhat lazy, and that might be a little strong. We're so focused on our methodologies and our disciplines, and we so believe in them that we forget to stop and say, what, we've got to win the business over. We have to convince them of this, and we can't do it in the technical terms or in the areas of focus that we've acquired the knowledge of insight. We have to interpret that in business speak. We have to put it in terms that the business can understand and the business can appreciate. And unfortunately, many of us don't take the time to do that. And until we do, the business is going to see the flashy, and they're just not going to have an appreciation for the more mundane things that again, contribute to the success of any enterprise.
Well, that's true. And unfortunately, I think a little bit of the us and them today is we've become ingrained in this different language. Recently on LinkedIn, on one of the groups that I'm in, there was a question. I think it was one of the CIO groups, and there was a question from somebody, and I'm pretty sure the person was serious about asking the question, was, people want you to put things in terms of business terms. What do they mean by that? And so I was grateful to see that there was a whole lot of people in the group that were able to answer what that meant. So I hope the person that asked the question, really learned something from it. But you do see that in a lot of cases that the technical people really don't know how to put it into business terms.
Right.
Business value.
Which is why it's so important in those forums we're making those decisions, that you have business folks that are testing whether or not that's actually taking place. And when you bring these governance forums together, and in fact, when you address governance for the first time, you're looking at the formal nature of governance and how it's manifesting itself in your organization. You stop and first reflect on the decisions we're going to govern, and then you go to the second step: who's accountable for making those decisions? And we almost always find that it's skewed one way or the other, either towards the business or towards IT. We question that. We bring some other factions in, and when we do, it makes that overcoming that language barrier an absolute necessity, and in doing so, achieves just some of the things that I'm sure those people that responded were referencing. Got to some of the things that you would need to do so that you can actually have that committee communicate and understand one another and work together.
Right. So one of the other chapters of your book is what is the state of IT governance, and I think that's a natural segue as to you've been talking about this for a lot of years. It's getting more and more recognition. More groups are talking about it. What do you think the state of the whole situation with corporate governance is today?
Well, corporate governance is something that's always been there. IT governance is a subset of corporate governance. I'm afraid it's still incredibly immature. For the last probably more than 10 years, though, we broke through the barrier, and it became a highly important aspect of executive decision-making on both sides of the fence, whether you're in IT or the business. I mean, there's no doubt that IT governance has been on the top 10 list easily for more than a decade now of leadership in the organization. But the question is when they're using that term, what do they mean? Everybody's doing it, but what are they doing? And from all the evidence that I have in looking at studies, but not just studies, visiting more than 150 companies around the world over the last 5-6 years, I can tell you it's incredibly immature. And it generally focuses on one of two areas. It either looks at risk, which is incredibly important, but only one of the 5 principles that I described. I mean, it's absolutely essential. But risk is only part of it. Delivering value, being aligned with the business, managing resource performance are also aspects of governance, and many organizations don't stress them to the degree that they stress risk. The other place where I find governance is mostly focused is on investment decision-making. Incredibly important as well, and gets to the value proposition and to some degree some of the alignment, and maybe even the resources and performance. But when I talk to folks about IT governance, I talk about 11 major governance processes. Governance, risk, and compliance. That risk aspect is one. Product and portfolio management, making good investment decisions is another. But there's much more to IT governance than those two. And although most organizations are looking at aspects of strategic planning and project execution and enterprise architecture and provisioning and development, and I can go on with the rest of the list, they don't look at them through a governance lens. They don't realize that these are things that are influencing how decisions are made and how work is actually accomplished. And that's where you'll see a lot of immaturity in governance. And even though I mentioned the risk and the attention to investment management, product and portfolio management, even though organizations make the mistake of equating that with IT governance, when they tackle that, a lot of them are only tackling a subset of what product and portfolio management should do, and that, unfortunately, is still incredibly immature as well.
Well, and they also tend to make those decisions at not the highest level. I mean, we've talked about it being at the board level, and rarely is it there, or even at the CEO. You find it tends to be the CIO, if there's somebody with that title, and the CFO that are making these decisions.
Absolutely. It's technology discussions are still an ad hoc agenda item on most boards. And IT governance, the worst thing about that name, my beloved IT governance has its first 2 letters, IT. It gives people it fosters the misconception, and it gives them the wrong idea that it's a function of IT, when in fact it should have been called enterprise governance of IT, because it's a function of the board and it's a function of the business. But the reality is, as you noted, that's not where the discussion takes place. That's not where decisions are made in regards to technology. It's delegated, if not relegated, if not abdicated, to the CIO. And so I do spend the vast majority of my time working with CIOs and helping them to get the business and the board to realize what an imperative it is for them to be a partner in IT governance at the very least. I mean, that's a compromise initially, and then hopefully one of these days they'll understand that they're the ones that actually need to lead IT governance, that they need to govern IT to ensure IT achieves the outcomes that are critical to the enterprise.
Well, that's great, and of course, you've given us a lot of great information, and hopefully people will tune in to and sign up for our corporate governance conference. But before I get off on that, I'm sure you want to let everybody know where they can get the book.
Oh, just go ahead and Google it. It's on Amazon.com. That's the best place to go. It's called Eliminating Us and Them, Making IT and the Business One. And not only do I urge them to pick up a copy, I'd love to hear what they think about it, because I really intended it to be more for a business audience than an IT audience. I mean, I'd love everybody in IT to read it, but it does not require a technical background at all. I mean, it's very conversational, it's very business-focused, and I'm just delighted every time somebody from the business picks it up.
Well, that's great. I may end up going out and having a few of my clients take a look at it. So thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to thank everybody, all of our sponsors for the ACG 101 Corporate Governance Conference. That conference is coming up in June. It's June 6th and 7th. The evening of the 6th, we have a wonderful networking event, and you'll be able to see Steve there at that time. And then all day on the 7th, we have our multitude of panels talking about various issues on forming boards, what boards do, and of course our panel on the IT at the board level. So we hope you all sign up. You can go to our website, acg101conference.com, and sign up. And I'd like to thank our sponsors. We have our annual sponsors, which are Feldman, Berman, and Schwartz, attorneys, Calabasas Capital, investment bankers, Stubbs, Alderton, and Markles, attorneys, Union Bank, Alex Auerbach, PR, and our founding sponsor, Wells Fargo Bank. And our governance conference sponsors are Galpin Ford. They are the #1 Ford dealer in the San Fernando Valley. Arxis Software, Bernard's Office Furniture, S&P Capital IQ, National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD, CSQ C-Suite Quarterly, and Singer Lewack CPAs. So we thank all of our sponsors and look forward to seeing everybody at the ACG 101 Corporate Governance Conference. So thanks again very much, Steve, and I look forward to seeing you.
Oh, I look forward to seeing you too, and I'm excited about the conference.
Okay.